Hello everyone and welcome back. For those of you that are new, welcome to the channel. This is Jay and I am back again with another true crime video. This is case number 2. This is absolutely a horrifying and heartbreaking case that I have for you guys today. It was actually very difficult for me. Researches all the time for this type of content. And it was actually really difficult for me for this one, just due to the brutality of it. Me just thinking about her final moments on this earth, and it was very difficult. So I will go ahead and put my disclaimer up now. Please, if you are not comfortable with this type of content or you're not in the right state of mind right now, please click out of this video. This is, again, a very brutal case. And please just take care of yourself. Mental health is extremely important to me, and I do not want to trigger anyone who is sensitive to this type of content. This case will involve a horrifying murder and fetal abduction of a very young, newlywed woman. So very serious topics are going to be discussed for today's video, but let's go ahead and get into it. So this is the case of Bobbie Jo Stinnett. She was born Bobbie Jo Potter on December 4th, 1981 in rural northwest Missouri. She had a relatively normal and happy childhood as far as I could tell. There is honestly not a lot of background for her child and teenage years. She was described as a very happy, loving, and sometimes a little bit shy. The people who knew her adored her for her sweet nature and positive attitude. She seemed to be a little bit more reserved when you first met her, but once you really got to know her, she was just described as a total sweetheart. She loved animals, especially horses and dogs. She went and graduated from Nottoway Holt High School in Graham, Missouri. She graduated in the year 2000. During her time at Nottoway High School, she was a cheerleader and an honor student. And this is also the place where she met her husband, Zeb Stinnett. These two quickly became high school sweethearts shortly after they met. They just seemed to be completely head over heels in love with each other, just completely an inseparable couple. They did marry shortly after graduating high school by the year of 2002, and they moved into a small town by the name of Skidmore. Skidmore, Missouri, when I say is a small town, I mean it's an extremely small town. At the time of this case in 2004, less than 300 people lived in this little town. And I looked at it now, and it does say there's still less than 400 people that live there. So it's not surprising. This is a very tight-knit, close community. Everyone knows one another. Everyone knows each other's business. And of course, everyone knew of the newly married couple, Bobbie Jo and Zeb Stinnett. They settled and rented a small little white home in Skidmore. Her husband, Zeb, worked at a local manufacturing plant, and Bobbie Jo herself created her own business. Due to her love of dogs, she created a rat terrier breeding business called Happy Haven Farms. She bred, raised, and competed in dog shows with these rat terriers. She ran this business from within this little white home. Bobbie Jo frequently went to dog shows around the states, and she won a couple of ribbons doing this. She loved every minute of doing these dog shows, and she seemed to be very good at it as well. She was a very knowledgeable person when it came to dog breeding techniques. She became a part of this online dog breeding community on these online messaging boards. You know, back in 2004, that's when internet was starting to pop off. It wasn't anywhere near like it is today, but there were these message boards and people were starting to get into them. So by the time in early 2004, Bobbie Jo found out that she was expecting her first baby. And Bobbie Jo and Zeb were just so excited to be starting a family together. They both continued to work, and they were trying to save money so they could actually buy a bigger home for their growing family. Bobbie Jo, at this time, she continued to promote her rat terrier business with her website. She frequently posted pictures of herself, all of her dogs. She was still very involved with these online messaging boards. She was a part of an online group called Ratter Chatter, which, by the way, great name. And for this group, Ratter Chatter, this is actually where Bobbie Jo began corresponding with a woman that called herself, at the time, Darlene Fisher. But this was a fake name. Her name wasn't Darlene Fisher. Her real name was Lisa Montgomery. And as always, I will go ahead and refer to her as LM for the remaining of this video. So let's go ahead and go back a little bit and let's give you a little bit of a background on LM. The reason I'm doing this specifically for this video is I feel like it's very important to understand the perpetrators as well, especially in this case, because I believe what she went through as a child and teenager, and even in her adult years, I believe that led to what she does to Bobbie Jo. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it, you guys. Fair warning. LM had a very shitty, very horrific childhood. A lot of the claims are still alleged, so I will be using that word a lot while talking about her childhood. LM was born on February 27th, 1968. She was born to a 20-year-old woman named Judy and a 25-year-old Vietnam War veteran named John. Her mother, and I hate to even refer to her as a mother because she wasn't one. She was a sick individual. According to court records, LM's mother drank very excessively during her pregnancy with her, and as a result, LM was born with brain damage. Allegedly, according to LM's older half-sister, Diane Mattingly, Judy was extremely abusive to both of them when they were little. John at this time wasn't home a lot, and eventually Judy and him separated and she got custody of both of the girls. Diane wasn't biologically Judy's, but both were John's children. Diane, she claims that Judy would hit them with brooms, belts. She would whip them with cords and hangers. During this abusive time, Diane took it upon herself, since her being the older sibling, she made it her job to protect LM. And she took her job very seriously. She did everything she could to protect her little sister. She adored her little sister. They slept in twin beds together. They were always holding hands when they fell asleep. Diane just absolutely adored LM, and LM absolutely adored her. She tried to prevent punishment going to LM. She would take the punishment if she could. Diane states that Judy would make her eat raw onions or sleep outside in the cold naked as punishment. She would also make them take cold showers as a punishment. Allegedly, according to Diane, she had brutally murdered the family dog in front of the girls, and I believe they were around the ages of 3 and 7 at this point. What she did, this is just absolutely sick. She took a shovel and she continued to hit the dog over its head over and over until it died. Eventually, Diane, since she wasn't Judy's biological daughter, she was eventually removed from the home by Child Services. She went to a foster home, and she said that she got great parents and she got to escape. And she was distraught when she learned that her little sister wasn't going to be coming with her. Child Services did not take LM away like they did Diane. They left her there. So at this point, LM was 4 years old. She was alone with the monster that gave birth to her. They moved around a lot. Judy would bring several men home, in and out of the home all of the time. She married, I believe, a total of 6 different times throughout LM's childhood and continued the abuse. By the time LM turned 11 years old, Judy began to traffic her own daughter. She made her have sex with grown men for money. Her entire childhood is literally the definition of hell. Constant physical, sexual abuse. She was gang raped, allegedly, by her stepfather and his friends. Just absolutely god-awful situation for anyone to be in. And in this instance, I will say that LM is a victim too, in a lot of ways. No person on this planet deserves to go through what she went through. And in that sense, I do feel very sorry for her that she had to go through this. Unsurprisingly, as she got older through her teen years, trying to cope with all of the bullshit that was going on around her, she began to experiment with drugs and alcohol. By 1985, Judy married another man by the name of Richard Bowman, and Richard had a son named Carl Bowman. Carl was LM's stepbrother. By 1986, Carl had ended up impregnating LM. The moment she turned 18 years old, they fled together and got married, but escaping with Carl didn't stop LM's abuse by any means. It continued with him. Allegedly, he would beat and rape her on numerous occasions throughout the entirety of their marriage. No matter what she did, she just couldn't seem to escape abuse from her life. She ended up having 4 children with Carl between the years of 1987 and 1990. She had 4 kids in 4 years. She had 3 daughters and 1 son. After giving birth to her last child in 1990, she did receive a surgery which made her sterile or unable to have kids. LM, she never settled anywhere basically her entire life. They would all move from town to town, state to state, never settling anywhere for very long. In a couple of articles, I saw that she apparently lived in 61 different known addresses during her first 36 years of her life. LM, through all of her abuse, all of the hell she suffered, it's unsurprising that she wasn't a great mother herself. The kids were described by neighbors when they would see the kids. They were filthy. They would be running around, just no supervision involved. The house or any place really they lived at, it was also dirty, never clean. As the years went on, LM's behavior just became more and more erratic. Her psyche from the lifetime of abuse deteriorated by each day, and she never received help from anyone. She told people what she was going through throughout her life, and no one seemed to care. No one helped her. She was just stuck. Constant cycle of abuse. Eventually, her and Carl did get a divorce, and she then married another man, and his name was Kevin Montgomery. During both of her marriages, she had faked pregnancy a few times with both men. Carl was fully aware that LM could not physically get pregnant. He knew about her surgery. He knew that it was impossible for her to carry a child at this point, so he just disregarded any time she tried to fake a pregnancy. But Kevin, on the other hand, he ended up believing LM every time she said she was pregnant. Apparently, she said she was pregnant once, and she said that the baby died, and she then gave its body to science. And for whatever reason, Kevin believed this. I guess he was a little bit gullible, or maybe he wasn't all there, I'm not sure. But he believed her. And every time she would say that she was pregnant, she would dress in maternity clothes. She would act out pregnancy symptoms. She would gain weight. She would act like she was sick or not feeling well. She would just very much act like she was actually pregnant when she wasn't. So that brings us to around where this case begins. By 2004, LM lived in Melbourne, Kansas. Only 2 of her children at this time still lived at home with her. The other 2 were old enough and they moved out. And it was around this time that LM started telling everyone she knew, her husband, relatives, friends, that she was pregnant again. So LM and Bobbie Jo had one thing that they had in common, and that was for their love of rat terrier dogs. They both absolutely adored them. And that's when she stumbled upon the Ratter Chatter message board. And she corresponded with Bobbie Jo a couple of times. They actually did meet one time briefly face to face. They had both ended up attending a dog show. And this dog show was in Abilene, Kansas. During my research, I actually found a photo of LM and Bobbie Jo together. Zeb was also in the photo along with a couple other people. It looks like Bobbie Jo's dog won a ribbon during this dog show. After this dog show, they kept communicating on the message board frequently. And it was at this point she was going by Darlene Fisher and using the email fisher4kids@hotmail.com. And that email is so scary for what LM does to this woman. Just absolute foreshadow, and it's just very creepy. Along with their bond of the rat terrier dogs, during their communications at this point, they bonded over something else. LM actually told Bobbie Jo that she was pregnant too. LM knew that Bobbie Jo was pregnant by her photos on her website, and the two women very much started to bond over pregnancy. They both started sharing pregnancy stories. They both talked to each other and emailed about how their pregnancy was going, and they kept the communication going. So 2 days before the murder takes place, LM's ex-husband Carl actually files for custody of the 2 remaining children that lived in the home. And again, Carl knew LM was lying about her pregnancy again. And apparently Carl was going to expose LM's lies in court in order to gain custody of the 2 remaining kids. And LM was absolutely scared of losing custody of her children to Carl. And I believe this is what led to Bobbie Jo's death. This was what set everything up in motion for LM. This is when she started premeditating this murder. The next day, LM messages Bobbie Jo. And she knew that Bobbie Jo just got a new litter of these rat terrier puppies and was in the process of selling them. And she used this. She emailed Bobbie Jo, quote, "Please get in touch with me soon as we are considering the purchase of one of your puppies," close quote. Bobbie Jo, who at this point had talked to, quote unquote, Darlene for a while now, she was very happy to show her online friend the new litter. She gave LM her address. They made plans for LM to meet Bobbie Jo at her house the following day, under the assumption to see the puppies. So that brings us to December 16th, 2004. At this point in time, Bobbie Jo is well over 8 months pregnant with her baby. The baby was due sometime in January. They knew they were expecting a beautiful baby girl, and it wasn't long before the new parents were supposed to meet her at this point. The day began like any other. Zeb left for work around his typical time, around 7 a.m. Bobbie Jo spent her morning as normal. She was preparing for her potential buyer to arrive. Meanwhile, LM was preparing for her kill. She had gathered a large kitchen knife and a white cord. She kept both of these items in her jacket pocket. She then drove approximately 175 miles from her home in Melbourne, Kansas, to Bobbie Jo Stinnett's home in Skidmore, Missouri. LM arrived at Bobbie Jo's home around 12:30 p.m. There was no sign of forced entry of the home. Bobbie Jo welcomed LM into her home with open arms. The 2 women played with the puppies outside for a little while. Then at around 2:30 p.m., Bobbie Jo's mother, Becky Harper, actually spoke on the phone with Bobbie Jo. And she was just reminding her daughter that she needed to be picked up from work, and Bobbie Jo had agreed to pick her mother up. She was having some car issues, and she was going to pick up her mother when she got off at work at 3:30. Sadly, this is the last conversation that Becky Harper got to have with her daughter. Shortly after this phone call, police believe the attack occurred between 2:30 and 3:30. LM then attacked the 8-month pregnant woman. She grabbed the white cord from her pocket, and she strangled Bobbie Jo with the cord to the point where Bobbie Jo became unconscious. She then took the kitchen knife that she had also brought with her, and she began slicing Bobbie Jo's abdomen. She started performing her own sick version of a C-section. While LM was cutting her stomach, Bobbie Jo actually regained consciousness during this, and she attempted to fight off LM. There was a lot of evidence of a struggle. Bobbie Jo fought as hard as she could to save herself and her baby. She tried grabbing the knife from LM. She did manage to pull out some of her hair, but unfortunately, LM had the upper hand in this situation, and she was able to overpower, ultimately, the 8-month pregnant woman. She ended up strangling Bobbie Jo for the second time, but this time it killed her. She then cut out the baby from Bobbie Jo's lifeless body, and she grabbed the baby, carried it, and fled the scene. Bobbie Jo's body was discovered very shortly after this. When she didn't show up to pick up her mother from work, Becky tried to call her, but there was no answer. And so Becky then walked from her work, and her work wasn't very far at all from Bobbie Jo's house. It was only about 2 blocks away. She got to her daughter's house. The front door was wide open, so she went ahead and walked inside. She called out to her daughter. There was still no answer. That's when she entered the dining room of the home and saw the most horrific scene that any one person can see in their life. She saw Bobbie Jo on the floor, laying in a massive pool of blood. She called 911. She told the dispatcher that Bobbie Jo had been pregnant and that it looked as if her stomach had exploded. Her husband Zeb was called, and when he heard what happened to his wife and that his baby was missing, his heart just shattered, and he was a complete mess, and he was just inconsolable. Meanwhile, while all this was going on and police were coming to Bobbie Jo's scene, LM was driving the premature baby in her arms. She stopped the vehicle shortly afterwards to clamp the umbilical cord, and she suctioned the amniotic fluid from the baby's mouth and nose. She also cleaned the baby with baby wipes. She then grabbed a car seat that she had in her trunk, and she put the baby in the car seat. LM then drove to Topeka, Kansas, and when she got there, she then called her husband Kevin to announce to him that she had given birth to a baby girl. She told him that she was shopping, doing some Christmas shopping, and that she had then went into labor. She went to a local women's clinic around the area and gave birth. LM asked Kevin to meet her around this location in Topeka, and he did. He went with the 2 remaining kids that lived in the home with them, and they found LM and the baby. Kevin apparently drove LM and the baby in his car, and then the kids drove LM's car back to their house. When they got back home, they immediately called friends, relatives to share the great news that they had just given birth to a new baby girl and that they had named her Abigail. The next day, on December 17th, 2004, they all went out and did some errands. They went out to eat, apparently. They got some breakfast with the baby. And she kept flaunting her, saying that she had given birth to her yesterday and that she had a hard birth, and she just kept telling everyone this story. She just flaunted this newborn little premature baby that had just gone through the most traumatic birth possible and presented her as her own daughter. When they got home from going out and eating breakfast, police then knocked on the door. Kevin's clueless ass answered the door, and they said that they wanted to ask them a few questions and asked if they could come into the home. He let them in, had no problem with it. He invited the police in. They found LM holding the baby in the living room. She was sitting on the sofa. They then told the couple that they were investigating a murder and that they were also investigating an Amber Alert for a missing baby. They then questioned LM about the baby that she was holding, and she told the police the same exact story she's been telling everyone for 2 days. She said that she was shopping and went to labor and then gave birth at the clinic. She claimed to have had discharge papers in her car. She sent Kevin to go look for him, and what do you know? There were no such discharge papers because it was a complete bullshit lie. So at this point, while questioning, they asked to speak to LM in a different room away from her husband. She agreed. She then gave the baby willingly to one of the officers to hold the baby. At this point, she was away from her husband, and when they questioned her again, she had a new fairy tale story that she made up on the spot. She told them that, okay, I didn't give birth at this clinic. I actually gave birth at home while Kevin was out. And for some reason, she didn't want her husband to know that she had given birth at the home. She said that 2 or 3 friends helped her during the birth. And then when the police asked her, okay, what are your friends' names? So she then changed her story for a 3rd time. She said, oh, her friends weren't actually in the room with her. They were on the phone. They were just coaching her while she gave birth to the baby. She then also apparently stated that she had given birth in the kitchen and she threw the placenta in a nearby creek. And when the police heard this, they knew she was lying out her ass. They knew it was a bunch of bullshit, and they then asked if they could move the questioning from in the home to an actual station. And LM agreed to this. At this point, I do believe LM knew that she wasn't going to get away with it. While LM was being questioned at the station, they obviously took the little baby and they took her straight to a hospital to get looked at. And miraculously, the baby was unharmed. She was beautiful, and the most important thing was that she was healthy. She could have had any number of issues with the traumatic birth that she had. She was about a month premature, so she could have had lung issues. Anything could have gone wrong. But by some miracle, she was perfectly healthy. They immediately reunited her with her father, Zeb, the same day, and he named the baby Victoria Jo Stinnett. The police investigation was able to be solved so quickly because Bobbie Jo had told her mother Becky and her husband Zeb that she was expecting a Darlene Fisher to look at the rat terrier puppies that day. And as far as anyone knew, this was the only person that Bobbie Jo was expected to see that day. So the police looked through Bobbie Jo's computer records, they searched through the Ratter Chatter message boards, and did a quick search of a Darlene Fisher. They very quickly discovered that Darlene Fisher did not exist. They then traced the IP address from the message boards and traced it to Kevin and Lisa Montgomery's home at 32419 South Adams Road in Melbourne, Kansas. Not knowing if the baby Bobbie Jo had been carrying was alive or dead initially, the police immediately worked on getting an Amber Alert sent out for this missing baby. Because an Amber Alert requires certain criteria to be put out, the alert was actually initially denied. Because again, they didn't know if the child was even alive, and there was really, at the time, no protocol on an unseen newborn baby. All the police knew at this point was that the baby was missing. The police were able to contact a congressman, explain the situation, and this congressman ended up overturning that denial. And thankfully, they released the Amber Alert. By the time the police had gotten to the Montgomery house, the Amber Alert was also released. So during LM's questioning, the police basically told her that they just wanted her to confess. And she slowly began to break down. She was hesitant at first because she said that what happened was awful. And she was initially just unwilling to talk about it. But the police continued to urge her. They told her that they already knew what happened, but they needed to hear it from her. And that's when she looked up at them and stated, "You do have Bobbie Jo's baby." And she then confessed to murdering Bobbie Jo and abducting her baby. So, of course, LM was instantly arrested after this confession. She was charged with first-degree murder along with kidnapping resulting in death. LM's defense team, they tried to plead an insanity case. They stated that due to the lifetime of abuse that she had endured, she had undiagnosed mental disorders, including depression, borderline personality disorder. She had post-traumatic stress disorder, and they even tried to say that she was also suffering from pseudopsoriasis, which, if you don't know what this is, it's also known as a false pregnancy. It's when a woman displays symptoms of pregnancy when she is not actually pregnant. With pseudopsoriasis, you can display physical symptoms of pregnancy as well, such as weight gain, tender breasts. You can even feel fetal movement in the stomach. This defense did not work, as the prosecution pointed out that what she did was premeditated. It's undeniable that she planned Bobbie Jo's murder. She drove over 170 miles in order to complete this murder, to kidnap her baby. And the police very much believe that her motive was to prove everyone that she was pregnant. That way she couldn't lose custody of her 2 remaining kids that lived in the home. She was so afraid of her ex-husband Carl, of exposing her lies, and had such fear of losing her children that she came up with this disgusting, horrible plan. She was seeing Bobbie Jo pregnant in photos on her website. She knew that she could manipulate the situation. She messaged Bobbie Jo and misled her by saying that she wanted to purchase one of her puppies. And she went to her house for the sole reason to take that unborn child from her. LM was found guilty on October 22nd, 2007. A couple of days later, on October the 26th, the jury recommended that LM face the death penalty. Judge Gary A. Fenner sentenced LM to death after this. LM's sister, Diane, she had tried to get appeals for LM's death penalty sentence. She felt that LM was a victim herself, and as such, she did not deserve the death penalty.
What she did was horrendous. I am not discounting that. She did do a horrendous thing. But she did it in a mental break.
She truly believed that her sister did not deserve to die. While incarcerated, since she had psychological diagnosis at this point, they put her on much needed medication, and it is stated that after she was put on this medication, she became much more aware of her actions. It does also state that she did show true signs of remorse for what she had done to Bobbie Jo. The original date for the death penalty to be carried out was on December 8th, 2020, but due to COVID, it was pushed back a bit. Despite the appeal efforts, they were all denied, and finally, on January 13th of 2021, LM was executed by lethal injection. LM was asked if she had any final words, and she simply replied no. She was pronounced dead at 1:31 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. With her death being carried out, she became the first female federal prisoner in 67 years to have the death penalty actually carried out. I really do hope with the death of LM, Bobbie Jo's family, friends, and loved ones have found some sort of peace with that outcome. I chose this case for a lot of reasons, but my main reason why I chose this case specifically to cover was because of the silver lining that this horrific case has. The silver lining is Victoria Jo. I find it so incredible that this beautiful little girl survived this horrific way that she was brought into this world. She is going to be 18 years old on the anniversary of her mother's death on December 16th, 2022. And her family absolutely adores her. You can definitely tell that family loves that girl. They say that she looks just like her mother. And I have a deep respect for this family because they did not put her into the spotlight. There are a few photos of her as a baby, but other than that, there is no photos of her. They kept her away from it all, and they did an absolutely fantastic job of doing this. The family is very private. They have not spoken a lot about Bobbie Jo's murder, and I understand that. I know that this family wants to move on, and they just want to raise Victoria Jo. I really do respect the hell out of this family. Victoria Jo has been such a beacon of hope for her family. It truly crushes my soul thinking about Victoria having to grow up without her mother. She's almost an adult now, and I'm sure by now she is aware of what happened to her mother. She came into this world, and I think the most horrible way imaginable. It's absolutely not fair that Bobbie Jo never got to lay eyes on her daughter. She never got to hold her. She never got to raise her into the beautiful woman that I'm sure she is. and it's just very heartbreaking to me. She was a 23-year-old mother who just wanted to see her baby, and it's just absolutely crushing that she didn't get that chance. I really do hope Victoria Joe lives her life to the fullest for her mother, and I hope the family continues to shelter her because she deserves her privacy. But that is all that I have for this case. Please remember to like, share, subscribe. I know this was a very brutal case. I know it breaks everyone's heart that hears it. So for those of you that have stayed for the whole story, thank you so much. Social media links will be in the description, of course. But until then, I'll see you in case number 3.